So again, starting with a new lambda function. So I'm going to change my region to Ohio. And I'm just going to create a function. So my function is going to be a CORS demo. Okay, and then our code is going to be very straightforward. I'm just going to create a response that is a JSON object. Okay, so course name, cloud for developers, semester, spring, year 2020. Okay, so this is our lambda function. Okay, nothing to it. I'm just going to go ahead and save it. I'm just going to verify that it's working, so I'm going to have a test event, so CORS demo test. It doesn't matter what I pass in. I'm not taking any incoming values. I'm going to create that function and test it. And if all is going well, I get my JSON object back. Okay, so just kind of a hard-coded object that we're returning from our lambda function. I want to create a new API gateway API that accesses this function. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to API gateway. I'm going to create a new API. It's going to be a RESTful API. My API name is going to be CORS demo API. And then the one action that I'm going to have is a method. I'm actually going to show you, I'm going to create a resource. So the resource is basically a section within my URL. So if I call this MATC is my resource name, what it does is it adds that to my path. And then in the MATC path, I can create a method. So I'm going to say that my get under the MATC URL is mapped to that CORS demo. Okay, so I'm picking that lambda function. If I test this, I should see that same data that I was expecting. Okay, so that course object. Okay, so then I'm ready to deploy it. I'm happy with how this looks. I'm ready to deploy this. And it says, hey, you have to deploy it. I'm going to deploy it to a new stage. I'm going to deploy it to my development stage. Okay, so now you'll notice that my URL is aws.com/development. You'll notice I get this, that it's missing an authentication token. It's fake. And the reason I say that is because I really have to go to this specific resource URL. So before I just went to the development URL. The development URL does not have any methods defined underneath it. So at the root of my API, there are no methods that are accessible. The only methods that are accessible are under the MATC URL. So I created that sub URL, that resource URL. So now I have to go into MATC/development in order for this to work. Sorry, development/MATC. Yeah. Okay, so see how both of those pieces are on the URL? Like what's the stage and then what's the resource name? I'm just going to hop over to Atom for a second. So within my URL, I'm going to get an AWS API gateway URL. So I have an API gateway URL, right? Like it's whatever Amazon assigns to me. This is Amazon assigned. Then what ends up happening is for the full URL, I have a stage name, right? That's part of it. And then I have a resource name. That's part of it. So what ends up happening is I get my API gateway URL slash stage name slash resource name. And then I can have variables here if I want. We'll eventually get to that point where I'm passing variables through the URL. But that's how I build my full URL. Okay, so it looks a little bit concerning when I get over to my API gateway and it says, here's the URL. So like if I click on this, here's the URL to invoke it. It says, hey, you're missing an authentication token. I'm not missing an authentication token. I'm not doing any authentication yet. I have the wrong URL. I have a resource called MATC that I can access underneath that stage. Okay, so that's the URL that I want to hit. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to take that URL and I'm going to build like a simple JavaScript application to hit this URL. Okay, so out in Atom, so a real simple HTML site with JavaScript. I'm just going to embed all of it right here. So I'm going to have a script. I'm not having any event handlers. I'm not even having an external JavaScript file. Like my JavaScript code is going to execute right inside of my HTML. Probably not the cleanest solution, but like it's easy to read. So I'm going to say, give me a new XML HTTP request object. I'm going to open an HTTP GET request to that URL that I have. And let me put that into its own variable. And then I send it. I'm just going to save this on my desktop as index.html. Okay, and then the idea is that I'm going to have some kind of callback. So I can say xhr.add event listener, ready state change, some function definition that's going to occur if the xhr.ready state is equal to 4. I'm going to alert my response. Okay, so when the page loads, I alert my response. Easy enough. So then I bring that page up in a browser. So here's index.html. This is the file that I just created. I'm just opening it in a browser. And you'll notice that I'm not getting a response. That's not good. I was hoping for a response, right? And if I inspect this and look at the developer tools, tells me that access to the XML HTTP request from origin null has been blocked by the CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. Okay, so here's what's happening. Is when I'm going to make that XML HTTP request, whenever I'm going to make that asynchronous request back over to the server, if I want to do that, the CrossOrigin resource policy by default is going to block that request if it's not on the same domain as where the service resides. So my HTML file is not on the same domain as my service. So by default, my request is going to get blocked. That's what the CrossOrigin resource sharing policy does, is it blocks those requests if they're not from the same origin. Okay, I don't want it to be blocked. It's an API. I want external users to be able to use my API. Okay, so I showed you this really quick on Tuesday. So in my API for this resource, for my API, I can enable CORS. I think it's for the resource. I can enable CORS. And a whole bunch of stuff happens. So what I want to do is I want to manually walk you through what's happening. Okay, so the first thing that happens, the way Chrome knows to block that request is it first does basically a test request using an HTTP options verb. And it says, which options are available to me? What can I do? Is CrossOrigin resource sharing enabled? So it does a request for the options. So if I want that to happen, I have to add the options method to my resource. Okay, so I'm on MATC. I'm going to create a new method, and the method is going to be options. Okay. I want this to be a mock. I don't want it connected to a lambda function. And then I get into this chain again. Okay, so what I have to do here is I have to describe what options are available. Is CrossOrigin resource sharing available? Okay, the way I do that is in the output, the response. To when Chrome hits this options, I have to say, yep, I'm open to CrossOrigin resource sharing. So in the method response, under the 200 response, I have to add headers. I have to add HTTP headers. There's 4 of them. These are the CORS headers. Everyone calls them the CORS headers. The first one is access, control, allow headers. And I don't have to configure them at all. I just name them. This is one of the headers that I'm going to allow. The other is access, control, allow origin. And then another, access, control, allow credentials. And then one more, access, control, allow methods. Those are the 4 headers that need to be there. Once I have that set up on the method response, those headers will show up on my integration response, and then I have to supply values for those headers. So they're essentially key value pairs. So I define which headers I want to be sent in the method response. In the integration response, I actually assign values to those headers. See how they're there now? These header mappings. So the first one, I have it printed out because I always have to look at it. I want, and here it is. Okay, so this content type, X, AMZ date, authorization X, X API key. So these are all the headers that I'm willing to allow. The big one that I have to set is this access control allow origin. I'm going to allow it to anywhere. This single quote star single quote. And then the allow credentials is true. And the access control allow methods. Which methods am I going to allow? So right now I just have an HTTP GET. That's the only one that I need to enable. So I'm going to modify this so that you can get that resource. Fun, right? I have to do the same exact thing for my GET request. Okay, so I have my options request all set up. Now I have to do the same thing for my GET request. Okay, so again, access control, allow headers, access control, allow origin, access control, allow credentials, and then access control, allow methods. Okay, that's in my method response. The integration response, again, I've said these are the headers that I'm going to have. I have to have a value for them. So the headers that I want are the exact same values as before. The allow origin is going to be to star. The allow credentials is going to be set to true. And the methods are going to be set to get. I have to deploy this. And I'll be honest with you, I do this, like I used to do this for every single API that I built. So all the time. So access control, allow, like all of the headers. Now I rarely do it because I can generate it. And when I say I'm going to be honest with you, I would do this all the time. I know what the headers are. I know what the values need to be. And I'd work about 50% of the time. I'd screw something up. It's pretty messy. At any rate, let's give this a shot. Okay, so I go to my get. I want to make sure that it's still working. Looks good there. Okay, I skip back over to my client application. All right, so I was running into problems because it was getting blocked by the CORS policy. Now you'll notice that I am able to get my response. So I'm on the good side of the 50-50 proposition here. Okay. I'm not doing anything with the data except doing an alert, right? Like I'm able to access the data. I want to be clear about this though. So right now, our API is wired so that we have a HTTP GET request that gets us our data. That's the only thing that's in our API is we have a GET. The options is there just to enable CORS. If I decide that I'm going to have a post, so like project 2, you have both a GET and a post, and you have to be able to enable CORS for both the GET and the post, then if I go to my options, sorry, I'm on the stage, not the resource. If I go to my options, one of the things that I set in the integration response for the header mappings was what methods am I allowing? So right now I'm only allowing a HTTP GET. It has to be a GET and a post. And then I would have to do the same thing that I did with my GET. I'd have to set up the method response saying these are the headers that I expect, and then the corresponding header values in the integration response. I'd have to do that for the post as well. Yeah. How did I get what? So it remembered it from the last time I said it. So it was in my IntelliSense in my browser. So you know how your like Chrome will remember your form values? Yeah, so for the first time, you're going to have to do this. So if I take you out to Blackboard, in Cloud for Developers, under course content, there's a blog post about this exact topic. And this person kind of walks you through like this exact thing. So he gives you some sample JavaScript code, you get an error, you create the options method, he gives you all of the different header values. Yeah. And then he's saying index.js, that's really his lambda function. Okay. But yeah, all of those header variables and their corresponding values are in that blog post. The good news for you is you have that blog post. That's great. You kind of know it's working. I'm going to blow away this service now. So I'm going back to my APIs. I'm going to delete this CORS demo. So it's gone. There's an easier way is basically what I'm going to show you. So if I create that same API, so I call it my CORS demo API, and I can set it up exactly the same way. So I'm going to create a resource called MATC. And then I'm going to create a method. It's going to be a get that's pointing at my lambda function, which is CORS demo. Okay, so it's set up the exact same way. Now if I go to the top level of my API, one of the options that I have, sorry, not the top level of my API, I do that every time, the top level of my resource, so on each resource, I can enable CORS. So this is just a button that I can click essentially from my actions menu. And it says, which methods do you want to use? I can enable it and it'll automatically do all of those things that we just did. Yes, replace all those existing values. See how the options method exists now? If I look at the options, I can see the method response. They only have 3 of the 4 headers. They don't have credentials allowed. And then the integration response has those value mappings. They did the same thing for me. It's point and click now because it was so common. And then I'm ready to deploy it. I don't have a stage, but I'm going to call it development just like I did before. So I really need this URL, which is going to be different now. So I'm coming back to my client application. I'm changing my URL to the new location. I don't know what the URL actually changed, but I'm assuming it did. And now I want my client application to just open in a browser. So there's my open in browser. And you'll see I'm able to access that data without that CORS error. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop here for today and kind of turn you loose on the project and going forward. So on Tuesday, I want to cover how to secure your API by having an API key. So our API is then going to be secured behind an API key. And the way we're going to handle it is probably the easiest way because I don't want to get into using JSON web tokens to actually handle securing our API. We're literally just going to have an API key that's generated. So I have a client that asked for a key. I give them a key, and now I know who's actually hitting my service based on that client key. So we'll talk about how do I secure my services with an API key, kind of both our service itself, but then also from a client perspective, like how do I authenticate using that key? I'll also have your lab for Lambda, and that's kind of how we'll spend Tuesday. Thursday, you're going to have your midterm. Thursday is the last class before spring break. Okay, so you're going to get your API lab on Tuesday. You're going to have your midterm on Thursday. The API gateway lab, I'm not going to have due until you get back from spring break. So you have some time. But that's kind of the plan going forward. Once you come back from spring break, we'll start to get into EC2, and then we'll start to get into kind of that CI/CD pipeline, so continuous integration and continuous deployment once we get into EC2. Okay, so that's kind of the plan moving forward. That's as far as I've thought ahead, to be honest with you. So EC2 probably 2 weeks, CI/CD probably 2 weeks, and then we'll probably have 2 or 3 weeks left at the end of the semester where we can mix in some new content.